And next up, then, we have Petunia, bee's knees. So, Tanya, this is your opportunity to talk about this. And yes, please note that I put a cute little bee up in the corner because I love the name of this flower, of this plant. So, what do you want to tell us about when the folks at Bellflower Plant were doing the breeding work? What were they looking for? What were their aims? How did this come about?
So bees knees came about. There was a strong need that we saw in the market for really crisp, clean, saturated yellow. And by saying crisp and clean, what I mean is a lot of yellows in the marketplace will be a buttery, creamy tone, or they will have brown veining in them that will give them almost a dirty look, or they'll have definite green undertones, which when put into the landscape, you start to lose that yellow because of all the foliage in containers and in the landscape. So it was really important to bring a true yellow to the market. One of the largest feedbacks, biggest complaints, I guess, that we hear from growers and from home gardeners is that yellow petunias really struggled over the longevity of the summer. They didn't really like rain. They don't really like high wind. And pardon my French, but they get snotty. And by snotty, they get that. We all know petunias are sticky, but when they get wet with rain, they tend to just deteriorate so quickly. So it was really important to work with a very strongly branched plant to start off with, and then a very saturated, clean yellow. So in 2016, we knew we had something here. So we started to put the bee's knees, at the time it didn't have a name, put it out into one of our 19 trial sites across North America. So in the United States, there are, I believe it's 17 trial sites across the United States. And we have two here in Canada, one in Ontario and one in British Columbia. And these are trial sites that are not open to the public. Of course, they're open to our breeding team, our selection team, which I'm a part of, and the growers that are taking part in the growing process for us. Where we put these trials, we put them in baskets, we put them in containers, we put them in the ground, we grow them in the greenhouse under extreme conditions where it can get very hot. I know there's been a couple times I've been in a greenhouse reading some of these trials, and it's 50 degrees Celsius. It is hot. We really put them to the test before we get them out into the public gardens and the AAS trial sites. So as Ken had mentioned, it is a long process of trialing to get to the point of execution and finally bringing it to market. So bee's knees did very well through all of our trial sites, and then hence bringing it to market for 2021.
Excellent. And you brought up something that I didn't mention earlier with the AAS trials. So we have anywhere from 24 to 40 different trials throughout US and Canada. So yeah, when it goes into an AAS trial, it has a lot of very critical horticulture experts looking at them. Some are growing in ground, some are growing in container. To think back to the profusion red yellow bicolor that was trialed in ground. Bee's knees was trialed in containers, but like Tanya says, it definitely does well in ground also. And I'm going to zip forward a couple slides, but I do want to come back. So Tanya, this is what you were talking about. I had mentioned comparisons. These are two of the varieties that bee's knees was trialed against because they were wanting a deeper yellow. So when we compared it to some of the other yellows currently on the market, they were a much softer yellow. So as you can see, the bee's knees, which is here on this one that I'm circling, I don't want to say it's on your left or right in case something is turned around here. But this one right here is the bee's knees, and you can tell that the comparisons were a much paler yellow. So for anybody wanting this good, vibrant yellow in the garden, this is the choice.
Yes, and I see, because I get to travel all across Canada extensively, and I do attend trial sites into the US as well with the territory managers down in the United States. So even though my focus is Canada, I do get to travel throughout the continent and visit different trial sites. One thing that I noted is earlier in the spring, and maybe in the slightly darker conditions in the Pacific Northwest and in British Columbia, we do tend to see a very dark yellow. Still no green, still no brown veining or anything, just really, really dark. And as we move across the continent into some higher light levels, like we would see typically in June here in Ontario and the Pacific, the Atlantic Northeast, that coast, we do tend to see it even get brighter in color if that's even possible. So depending on your light conditions, you're going to see different tones of this saturated yellow. And I think another thing that really makes it pop is it has a darker foliage. So sometimes a petunia will have a very chartreuse, almost vibrant green foliage. Bee's knees is very dark, rich, saturated green. And that green holds its color. So just depending on your light level, your yellow will be brighter or deeper.
Great. Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about what you saw in your trials in Green Bay, Wisconsin?
Yes, I want to affirm Tanya's conclusions. She stole my thunder a little bit, but I always look as the judge look to make sure that what the breeder claims is true. I'm looking for a great garden plant is a baseline for everything. And then, looking into the breeder's claims against the comparison. So that was what was so awesome about this plant, is that it really did, show up as the yellowest plant of everything. And I was going to say the same thing, that the other interesting thing is the foliage was greener. So in Green Bay, Wisconsin, green and gold. I mean, how can you lose with that for the Packers, right?
He said.
Yeah, and then like you said, sometimes the other one, it held up to all the weather conditions, like I call it bedraggled sometimes after a rainstorm or at the end of the year. They're kind of like all skimpy and scrawny, and you've really seen the weather affect them, but not so with bee's knees. And the last thing is that, it was vigorous and mounding and kind of spilled over the containers that we trialed them in, and really like filled them out completely and lasted and bloomed throughout the whole season. So that's why it was such a spectacular plant. It lived up to all the breeders' claims. Plus it was a spectacular garden plant for everyone to grow, homeowners, anyone, that wants to grow it, and should be a good seller for all the greenhouses and commercial growers.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the spilling factor. So the way that it looks here in the hanging basket, and then I love this too, like over a retaining wall. I think that is gorgeous. And so, Mark, you brought something up. I think around the Green Bay Packers Stadium all summer, this is the only thing you need to plant, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'll have to go talk to Mark Murphy when I see him at the custard stand next.
Excellent. So Tanya or Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about care? We didn't talk about this with the zinnia, but does it need a fertilizer? Should you, be using a slow release or a liquid fertilizer? Does it not need a fertilizer? What about deadheading on this one? Who wants to take that?
I can take it away, Mark, and you can jump in if something might be differing from the conditions in your part of the continent. So this plant is structured when it branches, when it grows, to kind of do this. So what this enables it to do is, typically a petunia will split open in heavy rains because it's not branching, kind of crossing over like this. Bee's knees does do this, so you don't get a lot of splitting, which is what Diane's showing here in this spillover. I mean, if you were to get a split on that, you'd have big gapping holes of just green. And I wanted to bring that up. It's kind of like a weather tolerant petunia. So pre-launch year, I did do extensive containers in ground and baskets of bee's knees at my home. And what I do is, when I'm building my containers or my combinations at home or putting them in the ground, I use a slow release fertilizer right at the onset. Majority of your growers are already going to have that in your soil compound that you purchase it in, whether it's a container or a 4-inch pot or quart. So adding more additional slow release fertilizer. This is an aggressive yellow petunia, like Mark mentioned. So I find that feeding mine in May and then feeding them again in the beginning of July really took my plants right through this season. Deadheading, all petunias need deadheading pretty much. If I know Ken had mentioned a term we use often in it sounds terrible, burying the dead. But because bee's knees is on the aggressive side, it does continue to branch and mound and trail. So it too will bury its dead. I'm very particular in my garden, so I do go out and deadhead a lot and end up with the Petunia sticky fingers. In ground, I basically just let mine go. I didn't deadhead, I just let it continue to bury its dead all summer long. In my containers, depending on the size, I had both big 20-inch containers and then smaller 12-inch containers. What I find is about the third week of July, I go in and do an aggressive haircut on all the components, not just the petunias. My kids call it the ugly stage, because I go in and I just people are always like, can I cut off an inch? Oh, let me tell you, I cut off like 3.5, 4 inches. I take it almost up to the basket rim or the container rim. And what you're doing is you're just bringing more life back into that plant. So don't ever be afraid at your home gardens to just really get in there and give it a haircut. I mean, I wouldn't go 4 months without a haircut. So, well, I did during COVID and it wasn't good. So you just get in there, give it a haircut, and you're going to actually add health and longevity to that plant. So go in and trim away. Slow release fertilizer at the onset and then mid-season again. And yeah, that's basically all the care you need. And water it, not as much as Diane's husband maybe, but water it as much as needed for your climate in your area of North America. Here in Ontario, I have to water every single morning at about 5:30. So yeah, that's basic care.
That's excellent. And what's the size, if you've got one plant, what's the height and spread of bee's knees?
So I find that the one plant in the ground is going to give me probably anywhere from 8 to 12 inches of height. I've seen it come up nice and tall in a beautiful, warm, kind of moderate summer. In a cooler summer, you might be closer to the 8 inches in height. And then spread wise, you're going to get almost a 2-foot radius spread. At the Guelph trials, I believe it was in 2020, we had them in ground that year at the old Guelph trial location. And I believe Roger planted 6 plants, and it was just beautiful, breathtaking display. And it was a wide girth, probably up to 6 feet spread with those 6 plants. So very, very generous in the ground.
And you're mentioning Roger Shantz at University of Guelph. He is another one of our volunteer judges. So thank you for mentioning him. If we could, we would mention all 90 judges, but that might get a little boring to list all their names. Their names are on our website. And trust me, without our judges, the AAS trials would not even be a thing. So Tanya, you mentioned something about combinations. So I wanted to show this, and maybe you can talk a little bit before we move on to our third gold medal winner, but talk a little bit about putting bee's knees in combination plantings. What goes well with bee's knees besides everything?
So the year pre-launch year when I planted them at my house, and since launch, I continue to use them at my house. They just pop. It's incredible. So I mixed them extensively with other product lines. So I'm a big pollinator fan, so I like to use lantana a lot. I love lantana. I think it brings the pollinator party, and mixing a vibrant yellow with any color of a lantana is fantastic. And there are lantanas on the market that are beautifully branched as well. So it just lifts the plants up. They look great in ground and baskets. Salvias, I've mixed with calibrachoas, petunias, angelonias. So all of these are vegetative items, by the way. I might not have mentioned that. Ballflower plant is a vegetative breeder. We are not on the seed side, we're on the weedy side. So we are vegetative. So everything that I'm mixing with is vegetative, and sometimes with perennials as well. I use a lot of bee's knees at my mom's doing her gardening with her, and she has extensive perennial beds. And because sometimes the perennials go through those transitions where there's not a lot of color, you throw in a bee's knees and it just makes those perennials pop even more. So it plays very, very well with a plethora of other annuals. Don't be afraid to mix it unless you're picking up something that's extremely compact. So always read your tags or ask your garden center staff for assistance. Make sure you're not grabbing something that's extremely compact because the bee's knees might eat it. You want to make sure you're picking something with medium to high vigor.
Excellent. Okay, and we do have a question. I'm going to show you, I guess, 2 or 3 different pictures, Tanya. So for the bee's knees, how many, do you have any idea what size container this is? Is it probably like an 18 to 20?
That's probably a 12-inch.
That's probably a 12-inch. Okay, and how many bee's knees plants are in there?
I would say in that container, there's going to be 2 lobelias, 2 verbenas, and probably 3 bee's knees.
Okay, and then what about in this one? How many bee's knees would be in that one? And do you know what size that hanging basket is?
That hanging basket is probably going to be an 11 or 12-inch. And again, it would be 3 bee's knees.
Excellent. Okay, Margaret, there's your answer. Anything else then on bee's knees before we move to the begonia? We got a lot of bees here.
I know Ken and Michael had mentioned where to purchase. And the same thing is going to be said for the bee's knees. It was very widely accepted by retailers across the continent. Your big box retail garden centers, as well as your grocery chain garden centers, as well as your independent garden centers. I get to travel across Canada quite extensively and into the US. And I don't think I've been to a grower yet that doesn't have bee's knees. So it will be hitting the market in all those different avenues of garden centers.